When we talk about the mental health of refugees, most of us probably think of one thing first: the terrible experiences in their home countries. But what if that is only half of the truth? In this analysis, we take a closer look at new scientific findings to understand the real roots of psychological distress. And what we find might change the way you see this issue. Let's start with what many people believe and what we often hear. Mental health problems among refugees are a direct result of war and violence they experienced before they fled. This idea seems very logical. But the big question is it really that simple? Does this assumption explain the whole picture? Or are we perhaps missing a very important factor? To answer this question, we will not look at opinions or feelings, but at data. There is a scientific study that offers a much deeper, evidence-based perspective, and it challenges the common narrative. So let's take a closer look. The basis of this analysis is a study from 2024. Researchers examined 305 Afghan refugees and asylum seekers in Austria to understand what influences their mental health the most. To investigate this, the researchers looked at two different types of stress. On one side, there is pre-migration trauma, the terrible events that happened before or during the flight. On the other side, there are post-migration stressors, the everyday difficulties and pressures people face in the host country. And this is where things become really interesting. The study shows how important, and often overlooked, these stressors after arrival actually are. Look at this number, 97%. Almost all participants reported experiencing at least one of these stress factors after migration. This is not an exception, it is almost the universal reality. But what do these stressors actually mean? They include chronic and exhausting conditions, constant uncertainty about the future, the inability to work and provide for oneself, poor housing conditions, fear of deportation, and deep loneliness. This is the daily struggle. And this brings us to the central point. A quote from the study summarizes it perfectly. The negative impact of daily stress in the host country was stronger than the impact of the original war trauma. Let that sink in. It means that not only the past, but especially the present, makes people sick. The study gives a powerful example of how human-made systems, our laws and bureaucratic structures, shape mental health, often more strongly than personal history alone. Let's compare two groups. On one side are asylum seekers who are still in the middle of the asylum process and live with complete uncertainty. On the other side are recognized refugees who already have legal protection and therefore more stability and rights. The results are striking. Among asylum seekers, more than 60% showed clinically relevant anxiety symptoms. Among recognized refugees, the number was significantly lower, around 45%. Legal status alone makes a major difference for mental health. And why does this difference exist? The answer is very clear. It is not about origin or ethnicity. The key factor is the number of stressors connected to legal status. Asylum seekers face much more uncertainty, more restrictions, and more fear, and this directly affects their mental health. Now we reach the scientific highlight of the study. It shows not only that stress makes people ill, it also shows that stress after arrival makes earlier trauma much worse. You can imagine it like this. Trauma from the past is like an open wound. Stress in the host country is like salt constantly being poured into that wound. It does not heal, it makes the pain stronger. This graph from the study illustrates this effect very clearly. It shows that the connection between past trauma and present depression becomes stronger when more stress in the present is added. Look at the top dashed line. It represents people experiencing many stressors. For them, the old trauma has the strongest negative impact. Stress today intensifies the wounds of yesterday. So what does all of this mean? It requires a fundamental shift in perspective. We need to move away from focusing only on people's unchangeable past and instead focus on the conditions we create for them today. The problem is not who these people are, but under what circumstances we make them live. The key point is this. Psychological suffering in this context is not simply something people bring with them. It is often a direct result of the political and administrative conditions that exist here. In other words, it is actively produced here. And this leads us to one final question. If long waiting times, uncertainty, and exclusion clearly make people ill, then this is not an unavoidable tragedy. It is the result of political decisions. The question is no longer only how we treat trauma, but how we stop actively making it worse. Today we discussed a study by Poya Andisha from 2024. If you have questions or topic suggestions, feel free to write to youtube@empowermigra.com. EmpowerMIgra, understanding begins with listening.